Hello and welcome to episode number 70 of the 40 Athletes podcast. Jimmy, good morning to you.
Good morning. You got a little snow up there in April? Getting close to April, huh?
Snow in March. Yeah, man. It was
Late March, early April.
Last weekend was close to 70, feeling good outside. And
Yeah.
then, welcome to Missouri weather. So that's just kind of part of the thing. But anyways, today, though, we got, a great guest on our show who is, her name is Misty Buck, and she really focuses on the athlete mental health playbook. That's her book, and really getting into that stuff of, what does it look like to have to stay mentally healthy, and so I think that's a lot that we talk about often here, but I like her approach because it's a little bit different.
Well, I mean, I think we talked about it's like the mental health, the challenges are going on today. And even, you think about you wake up in a day to where sometimes it's cloudy, the rain's going, there's not sunshine out. And I know people talk about it, they get in funks, like mentally they struggle through the day, right? So I love like just even in talking about athletes, how they can be mentally strong, but it just even people in general, how we can go throughout our days and we can be mentally strong and change from these negative thoughts to more positive thoughts to live a life we truly desire.
Yeah, absolutely. And, every episode, Jimmy, we try to bring on something that's going to help people in some way, somehow. So we're going to go ahead and bring Misty Buck on today because she has a lot of wealth and knowledge to share with us. So, Misty, good morning. I'm sure it's a little bit warmer where you're from down in South Florida.
Yeah, in Miami, it's a little warm today. We have a breeze, though, so that's welcome.
Welcome to Miami. Right, here we go.
Hey, by the way, we have the cool breeze up here too in Missouri, Kansas, but it's also 35 degrees.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's a little bit cooler, maybe.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to have you on today. Thanks for joining us. And because athletes are given, the mental tools to succeed, or the physical tools to succeed, but not so much the emotional, the mental. What are some tools that, as we dive into this, getting started about this emotional intelligence, mental health, can you give us some of your background and some of the maybe beginning tools we can use for youth athletes or, athletes that maybe have not dove in and really trained this part of themselves before?
Yeah, so that's a lot of stuff. So let me start. I'll start real quickly with my background real quick. How I got into this space, everybody always seems to ask me that question. So the Cliff Notes version of it is I was an athlete growing up. I was a cheerleader. My dad was a football coach. My brother was a football player. Safe to say I was always at the park, always at the field, just always around athletes. And it was at that time very much, not just in sports, but I think in all of society, very much don't be weak, don't be soft, walk it off, right? Like, and I know that still gets thrown around today, but that's just what I learned. And the problem with that was that I've always been a really emotional, you can call me empathic, call me highly sensitive, however you want to label it, but very sensitive kid. So like I would be, you probably know a kid like this, Jason and Jim, like they see something on TV, it could be like a commercial and they just cry, like it just gets them to like their heart. Well, that was me, right? I was that kid. So I was always like, why am I crying? Because everyone's always telling me like, Misty, what's wrong with you? Toughen up, whatever. And so I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, and I felt really ashamed. I'm like, I have all these emotions and I don't know what to do with them. And what ended up happening is I went through some tough times through probably middle school through in high school. And then in high school, I was finally diagnosed with depression and I was suicidal. I told my mom I want to end my life, and thank God she took it seriously. And I went and got the help that I needed. But funny story about that is, so at that time, I'm glad we're having these conversations, and I want to thank you guys for giving us a platform to have this conversation, because at that time I was even more ashamed of the fact that I needed to go get help. So kind of a funny story is, and when I was in high school, on that first day, my mom was taking me to the psychiatrist. For those of you who don't know, psychiatrists are the ones they're medical doctors. They are the ones that can prescribe medication. And so I needed that level of help. So I was going to go to that first appointment, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I must be really crazy that I need to go do this, right? It's like a lot of that self-talk and judgment. And she picked me up in the middle of the school day, and I was so embarrassed. I told my friends, we're going to lunch. My mom's taking me to the Cheesecake Factory, whatever. Because I could not bear to tell them that I felt that I have to go to get meds because I'm like, in this really deep, dark place. So, so I laugh about that now, but I say that because I'm so happy that we're having these conversations. So it's become a passion of mine to, as I've gotten older, I got certified as a life coach in 2015, and it's become a passion of mine to help people who might be going through something similar, but feel really alone, because I just remember what that felt like. And I've dealt with anxiety since then, in college, panic attacks, the whole nine. So I feel, if you can let your pain lead you to your purpose and you're comfortable doing that, then I'm happy to have these conversations and be really open about my story. So that's in a nutshell answering the first part of your question.
Yeah.
Hey, Misty, and I know you had a second, but I want to ask you this because you teed up a couple things. One is this: I do want to get in the weakness part, identifying that weakness, because you hear a lot of coaches throughout the years like, you're weak, you're soft, whatever. And I'm one of those individuals that I'll watch something on ESPN. It'll be a story about somebody, and I'll come upstairs, I'm crying. My wife's like, "Oh my God, you're watching that TV or whatever." So I'm that guy. But I want to ask you this. With the challenges like Jason recently went through, like at his school, like somebody, a father just committed, suicide. And, I know for me is like all these challenges that kids are going through today. I know my wife will sometimes talk to my son and be like, what's going on, buddy, or what's happening? Because you can see something maybe different in him. How do you get individuals the courage to open up about the struggles that they're going through? Is there ways to communicate with them to get them to open up? And like you said, you're going through ideas of maybe committing suicide, that you can get people to talk about it and they can get help before that takes place.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to preface this by saying two things. One, I am not a licensed psychologist, right? So I'm coming strictly as a coach, which means I have to know my lane, and that, I can't make diagnoses. I can't not giving medical advice, none of that, right? So let's make that really clear from the get. But also, I think the other thing, the part of that is, I think that it's really tough because you may have conversations with your kid or your friend and they're telling you they're fine, and they're really not fine. And maybe they do die by suicide because of whatever's going on in their own mind, right? So unfortunately, it's a very inner struggle that we can't always have control over what that person decides to do or decides not to do. And that pain is so real. And it's so debilitating. It's kind of hard to understand if you've never really been through it, just not being able to see a way out. So, but I think that having these conversations, number one, is really important, because by us sharing our stories, I think it gives other people permission and courage to share their stories. Because again, they may hear something different in my story or your story, and that they may not feel so isolated. Oh, you know what? I can identify with that. Right. So I think that's one tip, is just being honest with that. And then I think in terms of supporting people, whether you're a parent, a coach, a friend, whatever it is to, my favorite saying is, a safe space is a consistent space. And what I mean by that is, if you're saying to somebody, you can trust me, what's going on with you, whatever, but then you're totally invalidating what they're feeling. Oh, you shouldn't feel that way, blah, 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 right? It's kind of like you're passing judgment. Whereas instead of they're saying to you, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm really sad, or my friend said this to me, or whatever's going on for that person, and saying, what, that must be really tough, and giving them a space to just talk about it, where you're not being judgmental, and you're just allowing them, you're giving them permission to just be, and we like to say, meeting them where they are. So that's a couple tips right there.
Yeah. And, Misty, I kind of go back to what you said, having the courage to talk to your mom about being in a dark space, because, for me, it took me just yesterday, I had my first professional counseling experience, and I lost my dad almost 20 years ago to suicide, and so I had those same perceptions of,
that's a good step.
I mean, that was a big step, because I had those same perceptions of counseling's for, I can handle this. I got this. My ego is all this kind of stuff. I didn't need anybody else's help. And, the reality of it was, it helped, they have ways of bringing things out, because they can hear the way you talk, the way the body language, that kind of thing. But my question for you is, how did you build up the courage to say something to your mom and to even face those tough times? Because whenever you were going through that, it was really taboo to talk about what was really going on. So Can we talk about like, the inner courage needed to face those fears and even like the relief you felt afterwards of sharing that with your mom of maybe that, it wasn't as bad as what you built it up to be?
So I think that's a really great question. So I have to sort of think on and reflect a little bit on that. But I remember the day that happened. It's not like I went and had a conversation with her. Hey, mom, I'm thinking about ending my life and I'm putting together some ideas of how I might do that, which was what was going on in my head because I was so sad and I was so frustrated and I was so mad and I felt so ashamed and like all these different things that are sort of swirling. And I felt like I can't break. I see no way out of this. Right. So, and not wanting to think like, is this just the way life is? Like, am I just going to be in pain for all this time? Why do I want to do that? Why do I want to go through that? So those are kind of some of the things that were going through my mind at the time. I think I was about 17. And I think my mom, I was already seeing a therapist because of, again, other things that we had going on, right? So I was already in psychotherapy. But I think my mom could tell like there was something deeper going on. So literally when she came in, I'll never forget it. I don't even know why. I don't know if it's like mom's spidey senses. I don't know what it was, but she came in my room and she sat on my bed and I was on the floor. I used to doodle all the time. So I was like on the floor just doodling and I was doodling a graveyard. And that was normal for me, right? Like I just would doodle like these sort of pictures like that. And she came in and I just was like, I just was in a place and I don't know. I think it's honestly by the grace of God that the words came out of my mouth because it's not like I was planning on telling anybody, Mom, I don't want to live anymore. And thank God she didn't dismiss that. Like you're being like, thank God that didn't happen. Right. Thank God she took it seriously. And they're like, okay, maybe Misty needs another level of help here. Right. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful for her and my family for supporting me through that. But I'm also really grateful that for whatever reason, and again, by God's grace, that those words came out of my mouth at that time. So.
Well, it sounds like your mom, like you said, she didn't dismiss it or she didn't the way that she approached you, it made you almost feel comfortable, right? It's almost like, oh, you can, so like what we can learn from your mom a lot there is like, hey, just listen to them and not just assume like they're going to get over it. It's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. And again, I grew up, my household was very much tough love, right? It was very much, my parents had their own ways of the ways they were grown up, right? We grew up but again, it's very normal at that time, very tough love, it wasn't like, I often felt in various places that my feelings were invalidated. I shared earlier that I thought I was crazy and there was something wrong with me. I had all these feelings and nobody else was going through this but me, right? So, but I think, no, I'm a stepmom now. My stepdaughter's 18. And I know that no parent is perfect. No situation is perfect. You can always think I should have said something different. I should have done something different. And your kids don't know, like when you're in a bad space and you're having a hard day. So I think it's important to kind of have those communication things too. That's some of the stuff I've learned to be like, look, this isn't your fault that I had a bad day if someone's writing my back at work or whatever it is. Right. So, but I do give her a lot of credit that my mom has always stepped up and been there when I really, really needed help, when things were important. She was
I want to get into this part of it, like you mentioned earlier about kind of this, you're weak. And you have in your book, you talk about overcoming the you're weak argument. And I know for myself, growing up when I did, we had coaches that would be like, you're weak, you play like a little girl, you're a P word, the cuss word. They would cuss at you, do stuff. And I know sometimes I have coached like I've been coached, and I've had to learn through years it's not the best way. And I've said things maybe to some of the athletes I've coached that maybe aren't the best things to say. How can you help people that are going through life right now and they're maybe have some conditioning to think I am weak? People have told me that I'm not tough and that type of stuff, and they're carrying that with them and struggling today.
Right. Well, I think the first thing is the premise of the book is giving yourself permission to be human, right? And what does that mean? If I'm a human being, which all of us are, I'm going to have emotions. That's just the way it goes, right? I'm going to have good days. I'm going to have bad days. Sometimes I'm going to be angry. Sometimes I'm going to be sad. Sometimes I'm going to be happy, right? And that might all happen within the same day because our emotions are constantly fluctuating, right? So emotions don't make you weak at all. And I think there's a few things to know here. One is that our brains have some, not the scientists, but their brains have something called neuroplasticity. So what that means is that you're able to rewire your thoughts. So, right, you can take those negative thought habits and you can rewire them. You can change them. So if you're thinking, it's always been that way, or everyone in my family thinks this way, and I grew up that way, and my coaches told me all this, so that must be true, right? I think that's an inner dialogue that happens a lot without us even realizing. That you can make the decision, but I don't want that to be true for my life. I want to be able to have emotions, and I want to be able to work through them and learn how to be resilient, right? How to move past them, how to move forward instead of going one of two ways where you're completely being dragged on by them, right? Or we call that rumination, where you're sort of just sitting in that and emotions are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Or you're ignoring them and they eventually come out probably in unhealthy ways. So like explosive anger, maybe drinking, maybe substance abuse, maybe whatever it might be. Because as I always say, emotions are energy, and that energy has to go somewhere. So if you're thinking, going back to your question, that, that you're weak, I think you have to be able and be willing to get vulnerable. And that means understanding that you're human and you're not perfect. And every single person on this planet, those are two truths for everybody, right? Like nobody can get around that. So I think it's important to just sort of keep that in mind, and that you're going to make mistakes, but you're going to be okay.
Well, going back to what you said, the conditioning, like a lot of times our mind's been conditioned, right? In our subconscious mind. And you talk about that we can recondition ourselves, right? And I know in your book, you kind of get in, I think, talk about like affirmations, talk about meditation, things like that. What are the suggestions you can give to people? Because something I've been doing, I've read, of course, we have this inner talk that we give ourselves. They talk about this positive self-talk.
Right.
And I've been reading that you can put like, just even 15 minutes a day, have something like on speaker that's going in your house that's this positive self-talk, and it's just talking, and it has these positive thoughts, and you're hearing it. You might not be directly hearing it, but your subconscious mind's hearing it. You might be doing stuff. They say if you do that for like 30 days, you'll start to rewire your mind for success. Do you have suggestions of how like some of these athletes and people in general can start to rewire their mind to more for success?
Yeah, I love that tip, actually. So thanks for sharing that. To add to that and build on that, a couple of my favorites, as you mentioned, one is affirmations. So when people think of affirmations, they think, oh, positive statement, great, but I think there's ways that you can use them to your advantage. So instead of, let's say, I will be confident, how about I am confident, so that you're putting it in the moment. And then putting them in places where you can see them. So when you wake up, maybe by your nightstand. So when you wake up, you see it in the morning, you say it to yourself before you go to bed. And it could be a series of affirmations, by the way, but just putting them in the present. And then another trick that I like is, let's say I am confident. Well, what's going to happen is my old wiring in my body and in my mind, you might feel your body tense up or like something happened because you're resisting that statement. Like, I'm not confident. Right. So like, I want to be, but I'm not. So before you have a chance to like negate that affirmation, I always like to put the word yes afterwards. So for instance, I am confident. Yes, I am. So that then your body, and you don't even have an opportunity to be like, no, I'm not. Right. So another powerful tool that I think athletes get, and anybody really get a lot of value out of with affirmations is writing them. So you may want to write that affirmation 20 or more times a day for a couple of weeks, so that it starts to really sink in and you start to connect with it more, because now you have sort of a physical connection with it by writing the words. So that I find is really helpful. And then I'll share one more technique for that, is something that I really love. Meditation is great, but for being somebody who's active, like I am, and I know a lot of athletes out there, it's hard to just sit still and meditate, right? It's hard to just like I'm just going to turn off my mind here now, and I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to be really still. And that's difficult when you're an active person, right? Or when you're like a go-getter or type A or whatever it might be. So a technique that I like is called the emotional freedom technique. It's also known as EFT or tapping. And if you haven't heard it before, it looks kind of funny, but you'll tap on like different points of your body while you're saying things. And for whatever reason, those meridians, there's science behind it, but like they're called meridian points. And that helps it like physically get into your body. It helps you release, but it also helps you accept the good things. So like what you'll do is you'll say, okay, like I'm really frustrated right now. I'm really scared. I feel like I'm not going to make this happen, blah, blah, blah. So you're acknowledging your feelings. And I know why I feel that way, but really the reality is that, you know, I am confident, I can do this, I am powerful, whatever. Like that's how that works. So
yeah, I feel like we've just heard that recently from our friend Scott Fox. So it's you hear it multiple times, it reaffirms that. Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, it's interesting, Jason, too. I know you have something you want to go into Misty about, but I've been doing that technique, the EFT, with this program I've been listening to. It talks about, getting into these certain emotional states. So I've been doing it the last 3 days, and I have felt a difference with just doing it for 3 days. So
it's awesome. There's an app I really love called the Tapping Solution. I don't get any royalties or anything from them. I just personally use it. I really enjoy it. And they have different challenges. So again, I like to be really honest and transparent because I feel like, that's how life is. So I don't have it all together. Like nobody has it all together. So just last week I did a 5-day confidence tapping challenge. And so in the app, it had like a different tapping meditation for 5 days in a row about different parts of confidence. So like today, and I'm redoing it this week. So like today's was about quieting your inner critic. So, and it's just stuff that I think is important because you don't maybe realize how much you question yourself sometimes or what's kind of going on. So I really like that app if you haven't checked it out or anybody's interested in learning more about what EFT is.
Yeah. And, kind of piggybacking off that, like writing things down, and the power of that. You had a recent article that said broken crayons still color. And I think that a lot of times whenever, we fail or if we don't do things perfectly or whatever, that's when that inner critic really starts to flare up. And I love what you wrote about there because you talked about the importance of, hey, look, even if you're broken, you can still fill in between the lines. You can still, it turns from white to blue or whatever, the color. So can you dive into that a little bit more about like, hey, you know what? Things are going to happen in life. They may bend you, they may break you, but you can still get up and you can still make life beautiful and color in the lines or out of the lines for that matter.
Yeah, so I think that article that you're talking about is about perfectionism in athletes in particular and burnout and kind of like all those things that go together. It's kind of one of my longer articles, but I think to your point that I think when you're trying to decide, okay, like I'm going to rewire whatever it is that you want to, however you want to approach, your life is you can do, we call it growth mode in mindfulness. One of my favorite teachers, by the way, his name is George Mumford, and he wrote a book called The Mindful Athlete. Phenomenal. But he also talks about being in growth mode versus being in survival mode. So what does that mean? In survival mode, your mindset is, I made a mistake. I'm no good. I'm not going to make the team. I'm not going to get into the school I want to get into. I'm not going to get the promotion. I don't deserve this, right? So it kind of like imposter syndrome starts to come up a lot around that. But in growth mode, you're like, okay, well, I made a mistake. Now I learned how to not do that. And I learned a better way to do it, right? So it's just like a difference in deciding how you want to approach. And the whole thing about all of this is that your mindset is completely internal and it's something that is completely invisible. So you can't outsource it. Right? You can't go to somebody and say, can you do this for me? I can't get an app that's going to fix my mindset. You have to put in the work. So I think that that's the first thing is deciding always first and foremost, like this is something that I want and I'm willing to be disciplined and put in the work so that I can feel more at peace, so that I can feel more confident, so that I can feel whatever, all these different things. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, some I'd like to dive into. You talked about the inner critic, and I know in your book you talk about resolve the inner conflict. And I know sometimes I have an inner conflict that it's like, say it, don't say it, do it, don't do it, right? go, don't go. And
Mhm.
you're torn what to do. And you got this conflict within you. Like if you're playing a sport, it's like, should I attack? Should I not? Should I
Right.
shoot it? Should I pass it? Right? How do you help the athletes and people in general kind of get through this struggle, this inner conflict that they have within them?
So I think mindfulness and meditation are I really keep going back to those two tools because that's been the most helpful for me. The reason being is that you're able to, when you have a regular meditation practice, or just like I'm gonna breathe, I'm just gonna focus on my breathing for 5 minutes a day, where it doesn't have to be anything crazy. Maybe it's EFT, whatever it is. What happens is you start to just slow things down and think more clearly. So those decisions, even in the moment, feel like more like you're in a place of flow. They're easier to make, and I think also it's easier to come back to that place of inner balance. So I always like to say that meditation isn't like an emergency button. So people are like, they haven't been doing the work, but now they're like, just, on the verge of freaking out. So I'm going to do a meditation and it's going to fix everything. Well, it might start, it's going to start to bring down your stress level, but to really get the full benefit, like anything else, you want to train, right? So what do? You practice it daily, you put in the effort, all that kind of stuff. And then when it comes to that moment, if you're in a game or you're trying to make a decision at work or whatever is going on, you can pause, you can close your eyes if you want, take some deep breaths and connect again with that inner stillness, which is always where the truth is, right? That's always where the answer is. It's always where instinct is. And that's always the best place to operate from, in my opinion. So I think that's really a good tool. And actually I shared it in, not the perfectionist blog, I think the article I wrote before that. There's this great clip that was circulating on Instagram of LeBron James sitting on a bench during the middle of the game, and you just see him with his eyes closed and he's doing breathing, and you hear Doris Burke, and I can't remember the name of who she was calling the game with or whatever, and they're saying, oh, there he goes, he's doing his meditation thing. So it's something that highly successful people do. It's not just like a quirky metaphysical thing.
Yeah, and in your book, you kind of give tips for like a meditation practice. There's certain tips for that, and also, like you said, LeBron James. It could be someone's like, "Well, I can't meditate during a basketball game. I can't meditate during a football game when I'm on the sideline." Is there also some tips you can give to them on how to get mindful during those moments when they're maybe on the bench for a couple minutes before they go in and play?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for starters, when you're going to start a meditation practice, try different things. There's different way to meditate. Find things that work for you. Again, you might want to just be able to sit still. In a mindful meditation, we do things called a body scan. So you're literally going through the different points on your body and just being curious and seeing what you feel. But that also helps bring you into your body and slow down a little bit. There's mindful movement. So sometimes people really like this if they're really active, where you'll just kind of like do like a movement where you raise your arms or whatever it is and breathe in, and then you exhale as you breathe your arms down, or you do like a stretch or whatever it is and you're breathing into it. So kind of like yoga, but you're focusing on the movement with your breath, and that's another option. So there's lots of different ways. We talked about tapping already. There's lots of different ways to meditate. But I think also, really simply, if you're just starting out and you're kind of trying to figure this out, or again, you're in the heat of the moment and you're like, man, I need to just take it down a notch and focus, just always go back to your breath. So the simplest form of meditation, first of all, is not judging yourself, right? So if you have thoughts come up while you're doing meditation, I want people to understand that that's normal and that's what's supposed to happen. So you're not doing it wrong. People think, oh my God, I'm doing it wrong. My mind won't stop. No, that's the whole point of meditation, is to kind of recognize that you're having thoughts and come back to your breath and slow down, right? But again, okay, so anyway, so going back to this, so let's say you're in the heat of a game, or you're just trying to practice, maybe you're a student and you have test anxiety or whatever it is. You can do something called box breathing, which is what I really love. And an example of that would be, you would inhale, like slowly, by the way, because I did this with a group of girls last week and they were like, and I was like, no. And they're like, and I'm like, because you got to breathe slowly. So you're going to inhale slowly for 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then pause, holding that breath for 4, 2, 3, 4. And then you exhale, slowly counting to 4, and pause there, again, counting to 4. And if you do that 4 times in a row, it's about a minute. But it's called box breathing because it's literally like 4, 4, 4, 4. So that's one that I really love because it's something that's really simple and it can always just redirect you, I think, in any moment.
Hey, Misty, I know Jace wants to get in some, but going back to the box breathing, something I do, and I've been doing this the last couple of years with my teams, and I got like U teams, it'll be like 6th, 7th, 8th graders, and I'll do box breathing before practice or maybe before playing a game. I'll quiet their mind. I'll have them close their eyes and visualize and talk about it. But it's funny how young kids like that, they'll start to get goofy. They'll start to
laugh
and joke around or whatever. As a coach and old fat, I would, back in the years when I started, probably get really upset and be like, hey, better be serious, whatever. But I just kind of just keep like taking them through it, breathe in, hold, breathe out. And I just keep going, even if they're like laughing, doing whatever. But I find it, the more you do it with them, the more they start to get it and see the benefits of it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's the same experience I've had, actually. They get really goofy. Like with the group of girls, for instance, I was just with last week, they were like laughing for like the whole time, but I would like stop and like teach them something and then like redirect and we try it again. But then it's like the energy, they calm down. And I was like, okay, let's just try and do this one time without laughing if we can. Right. So, and not saying that laughing is wrong. I mean, that's like an expression of an emotion of stress or maybe something that they're holding in. So I'm not going to knock that, but you know, like, so anyways, I've had that same experience.
Yeah. And you know, I do it with at the end of class with my 6 to 10-year-olds because I teach K through 4. And at the beginning, like it was like, Coach, what are we doing here? Like, what is this? Like, I've never done this before. And then now, though, if we're running like close on time, or if I gotta get them lined up sooner, like, Coach, we missed our breathing. We gotta do our breathing. So it's almost like now we've done it for like 7 months now. Like you said, like, you know, care equals consistency. And so now they're like, if we don't do it, they notice it. So it's funny how things work. You introduce it, it feels weird, feels goofy, uncomfortable, maybe makes people laugh. But then once you don't do it, eventually they're like, hold on, time out, Coach. We need to we missed something here, you know.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And just to like pivot off that, you know, you talk about meditation, but I want to go back into mindfulness and using mindfulness to acknowledge your emotions, because a lot of times we're not mindful and therefore like we have these emotions that we don't acknowledge and embrace. So how can mindfulness help us acknowledge our emotions, feel them, and use them as signals, as messages, as opposed to like something we're trying to dismiss or push away?
Yeah, I love that. So mindfulness is like this huge field of study, and there's different principles that go behind it. But very simply, we know that mindfulness is what? It's being present in the moment, right? Well, there's also components like loving kindness. So, okay, let's say I'm driving and I'm in Miami, traffic is crazy. And I feel myself getting frustrated. Well, what I can do is I can acknowledge but again, this comes through training and through practice, right? To have sort of this ability to reflect in the moment, which is really what mindfulness is. Okay, let me focus on what I'm doing here. I'm driving. I'm feeling really frustrated. I know why I'm feeling frustrated, because no one likes sitting in traffic. This person cut me off, whatever it is, right? And so, okay, let me take a few deep breaths and see how I can redirect my focus right now. So that's like a very simplified way of how to use mindfulness in the moment. But again, I think there's a whole practice to it. So there's things, for example, one element of it is loving kindness. So you want to be compassionate to yourself. So instead of beating yourself up about making a mistake, or why do I feel so weak right now? Or I feel so stupid for being so sad about this, or whatever it is, right? Why did I let that person? We beat ourselves up a lot, right? Especially because, again, going back to that idea of being weak, like we think we have to always be strong and we have to always be this perfect person of ourselves and super tough and whatever. But again, we're humans and we have emotions. So being acknowledging of that. And then it also is acknowledging of yourself that, you know, may I feel peace. May I feel, there's I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's a loving kindness meditation. But basically it's like, may I be at peace. May I feel love. May I feel joy. May I this, may that. And then what you do is you think of somebody else and you return that on them. Just like me, this person wants to feel peace. Just like me, this person wants to be loved. right? So I think like, so there's so many different elements to mindfulness, but I think I teach this, I've taught this recently to parents and coaches because I think again, like we want to think, oh, we're the adults, we know what's going on. But the kid on the other side of that, they want to feel peace like we do. They want to feel love like we do. They want to feel acknowledged like we do. So there's all again, so that's just another element of mindfulness. And then in performance, the performance part of it, one of the things that we look at is something called right effort. So again, going back to survival mode versus growth mode, like, am I putting in the right effort here? Is it coming from the right mindful state? So, and again, these are all things that you can discover by using, for instance, meditation to help yourself slow down and recognize when these things are going on. So you can say, okay, I'm feeling this. Let me redirect myself now. Or tapping. So, okay, I'm feeling really scared right now. I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake. But I know it because I'm afraid I'm going to lose my spot on the team if I make these mistakes and I don't do well. But that scares me. But let me acknowledge that the reason that scares me is because this is something that's really important to me. Okay, so now that I understand that I'm scared because this is something important to me, I can take a few deep breaths, perhaps, focus, and decide I'm going to do the best job I can, and that's going to be enough, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of like a long-winded, all over the place answer, but hopefully it was helpful.
Hey, on that, Misty, you think about, we've talked about through the years, like IQ is so important,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's becoming EQ, the
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence, and you're getting into emotions right now. And in your book, you talk about like leveraging emotional intelligence. And I think something you mentioned is, I feel like us as adults, we're like children in adult bodies because the way we act at times, we act like children sometimes and throwing tantrums. But sometimes the adults it's okay for, but if children do that, we're disciplining the
Yes,
children.
exactly.
So this is kind of speaking not only like for parents need this as well as coaches, but children. What is emotional intelligence and how can you leverage it?
For children specifically?
Just you can get into children, but also I think parents need to hear this as well because I see parents acting like idiots, and I'll call out parents at sporting events, right? At a sport activities. And they act like you look at them, you're like, that's Joe the lawyer in town. That's Misty the dentist.
Right,
That's I mean, you see them, you're like, what are they doing?
right.
Right. So I think it's like you can speak to it regards to athletes and children, but I think parents as well.
Yeah, well, I think for everyone to understand, again, like deciding, like, I'm going to self-reflect. And because I think the thing is there's always something that we can do better at. And maybe you want to improve on those things and maybe you don't. I don't know. Who's to say? That's not my decision to make or anybody else's decision to make. But if you're looking to understand, like, maybe why you have an outburst or why things bother you, is again just being able to get quiet, get still, and in mindfulness, again, observing what's going on. So instead of judging why you're feeling that way, observe it. So how can we help kids do this? Is, we talked earlier about a safe space is a consistent space and asking them questions. Well, we know, we've all worked with kids. How was school today? Good. How are your friends? Good. Fine. Whatever, right? It's hard to kind of get to pull the whole story out sometimes. So I like to ask silly questions, and sometimes I'll ask a silly question as like an icebreaker. So for example, if I'm working with the kid as a coach, so what's your favorite ice cream flavor, right? Just stuff like that, just to build sort of some rapport. And then, okay, so, and they may not be able to say, you know what, I feel really agitated right now, or I'm feeling really, I have some apprehension. Like those words may not exist in their vocabulary, right? Or we may not understand how to label those emotions with words. That happens a lot with adults too, right? Like I don't even know how to label what I'm feeling right now. So I'm just gonna like try and ignore it or do whatever. So other silly questions that I like, again, kids or adults, a question like, if you were an emoji, which emoji would you be right now? Right? Because then it kind of like, again, it makes it simple for them to be like, oh, maybe I would be, like the monkey that's like this or whatever, like the the emoji with the stars over the eyes. I don't know. Oh, cool. So what's up with that? Like, tell me about that. Right. And you can kind of open conversation like that and get an idea of sort of where they are and how they're feeling. Another important tip is that emotions don't always just come up as emotions. They might also come up as a physical sensation in your body. So your emotions are very tied to your physical body. So for example, this happens to me, and I know it happens to kids, and they might say, oh my God, I have a stomach ache. And you're thinking, why do you have a stomach ache? Like, you didn't eat too much sugar. This is not happening. You don't have a stomach ache. You're fine. Right. But that stomach ache might represent stress and might represent anxiety, all these different things. So I think paying attention to, is my heart rate goes up, I have a headache, like different things will happen in your body to signal that there's big emotions going on and they're trying to get your attention. If you've ever had a panic attack, you know exactly what that feels like, because it's like huge. But I think also on the small level, like you might say, oh, okay, the kids might say, you know, I get a stomach ache every time I have to go to this class. Oh, really? And then just kind of getting curious. So what's up with that, you know, and just having a conversation. So I think like those are the starting points to building emotional intelligence, just having these conversations and making them not so like, what are you feeling right now? Oh, I'm fine. Oh, okay, you're fine. Okay, let's dig a little deeper.
Hey, Misty, I know you get in quite a bit about like how to, you know, kind of get over the fear of making mistakes and overcoming worries. And I get a lot with parents at times when I'm working with their kids or whatever, and they'll be like, my son or daughter has no confidence. My son or daughter is scared to be aggressive on the court. They're afraid to make a mistake. They're worrying all the time. How can you help like an athlete like that or a parent working with their child to establish more confidence, to not be afraid of making mistakes and not be worried about, you know, performing on the court, football field, or whatever it would be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's multiple elements that go into this, because I think it's always important to understand where that's coming from. So as a parent, it might be maybe or as a coach, maybe that child is thinking that you're expecting something of them that you're not, right? So I just asking them, like, what do you think my expectations are of you? And then explaining, actually, these are my expectations. And if you succeed, I'm proud of you. If you fail, I'm proud of you, right? So kind of having those discussions and making it okay. I think as a coach, also making it okay, but like, you know what, I made a mistake today at practice, and coaches are like, oh, I can't do that. But no, if you want to be human and you want to create that safe space and you want that rapport with your athletes, you have to build trust. So you can say, look, I made a mistake today, so that, you know, they can understand that it gives them permission to make mistakes too, if that makes sense. I think that's been really helpful in the past. And then also understanding, you know, is that fear of mistakes or perfectionism coming from someplace else? Is it because they're following a lot of social media accounts that are actually making them feel really bad about themselves? Is it because do they feel really isolated? You know, there's a lot of peer pressure today more than anything, but kids are also feeling really isolated. Even though they're around their friends, I think they still feel I'm finding that they're feeling pretty isolated, and that they feel like they have to compete with their peers, or they have to fit in, or there's all these different things that could be going on in this dialogue. I've worked with athletes who were older, who were like, I had to get to the pro level because that was my family's expectations for me, because they said that was going to be the way that me getting to the pro level, making all that money, was going to be the way that we got out of poverty, for example. Right. So they'll put a lot of pressure on the kids to make it to that level, just because they're going to be the one that pulls the whole family out. So there's so many different things that can go on behind why somebody's afraid to make a mistake, and why they feel that pressure, and why they want to be perfect. And usually I think it comes from multiple places. But again, just seeing, like, you know, it used to be when we were home, when we were done with school, we were home, and that was it. And we had sort of our safe haven. Now the kids, you know, you're always on your phone. Even adults, we're on social media. We're constantly seeing what other people are doing. And so that comparison is another big key, I think, that we're seeing in that. So I think having these discussions, and again, making it an open space to have the discussion, is really important. And then one of the points that I always like to teach kids is that, number one, again, going back, you're human, you're never going to be perfect. That's the way life is. Sometimes when you miss a goal, that happens to actually be the greatest gift, because you actually end up wherever you're supposed to be, and that might even be a way better place, right? So that, which is really hard for anybody to understand, but we know it's true when we've been through it. And then also just thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting my point right now.
Well, you're teeing a couple things up on this, because
Yeah.
something I want to go back to, you mentioned as a coach, admit that you made a mistake. When I
Right.
first started coaching, that was not me. I would not do that, right? Because I don't want to show like I'm weak or whatever
Yeah.
it might be,
You
right?
want to be
And you're
tough.
always,
You want to have control of the team. You want them to
yeah.
respect you. I get it.
And I would always like, and I used to, and Jason, we talk about this. I used to, when I first started coaching, I'd yank people out, make mistakes, yank them out. And I stopped doing that. But the other thing I want to mention is, like that you said, that like I played this team that we beat with this 8th grade team I had. And then we played them in another game in the tournament, and we got beat by them. So then we come back and we play them in a championship game in another tournament. And I told the kids, I said, we're going to take care of business on the scoreboard. We don't focus on the scoreboard. We're going to be successful. You know why? I didn't coach that well in that last game we played them. And I'm going to make some adjustments. I'm going to put you in a better position, and we're going to succeed. And I'll take responsibility for that last one. And it was interesting seeing the kids that kind of looked at me like, oh, okay. Right. There's like admitting that you make mistakes as well, right? You're not perfect. You're human. And so I just wanted to just say, as coaches, I think we need to be more like that.
Yeah, I applaud you on that. I think that's awesome. So I think it's hard, right, to sort of toe that line, because if you're going in every day and you're like, I made a mistake, then the kids might be like, you're making mistakes every day, coach. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah.
But at least every once in a while, like, okay, you know what? Like, that was on me. I should have explained this better. I should have called a better play. I should have done my meditation before, so I was more clear-minded. Whatever it was, to just sort of show that, and give permission that, nobody's perfect. We make mistakes, but we're going to adjust, and we're going to move on from here, because that's all you can do in life in general, right?
Yeah. And I know we're getting ready to wrap up on our 4 Qs, but I got 2 things I want to get into you real quick with.
Yeah.
One is this. You mentioned social media earlier.
Mhm.
And social media, I think, can be real negative for people, because they can look at it and they can see what everybody else is doing, and they're like, oh, my life stinks, right? Because everybody's posting the great things of their life. They're not posting the negative. You have something in your book that you talk about using social media to your advantage. How
Mhm.
can people do that?
Yeah. So the funny thing is that I actually also own a digital marketing agency. I've had it for 15 years, and our main business is social media. And so what I've learned from that is you have to treat social media as a business, period. So if you're going to be on it, and I know, that's good for like high school athletes, for college, especially with the NIL stuff happening with, adults. But as kids, it's a little bit more complicated, because that's how they're communicating with one another. They don't do group text anymore. They're going to like group chat on Snapchat or whatever it is. But I think that treating it as a business and understanding, like, okay, if I look at something and it's a beautiful picture, but that makes me feel bad about myself, I need to unfollow that. Right? So just sort of like coming in with self-managing that. So I don't want to take too much time up on that, but I think it's
No,
important.
that's right. I just think
How
social
you
media,
feel.
social media is one of those things, I think, to get people in negative thoughts, and they start to think less of their life and themselves. So that's something I think is important. And the last thing I want to ask you about is, you mentioned earlier, there's athletes that have expectations. They feel like they got to go pro. They feel like they got to go to do this, and they got to provide for the family. And say it comes a point, we all know sports is going to end. It's
Yeah.
over. You're not playing it anymore. You got to play rec ball with your buddies and do stuff, over
Right.
40 league or whatever. How do you suggest people transition out of sports when people have their identity so much tied into being an athlete and they struggle with that? How do you work with people to transition out of it?
That's a huge thing. And this is like a whole nother, topic, but I see that it affects so many people, and many more people struggle with, I think, a depression after they leave sports, because I even heard an athlete once describe it as being like like someone who's like in the army, for example, or in the military, and they come back and now they have to transition to civilian life type of a thing. So it's like, okay, now everything is completely different. And I think depending on the level that you at, it can be shocking, right? I've even had a football player tell me he made it to the NFL. He had no idea how to even make a doctor's appointment for himself. And he was so embarrassed by that, but he never had to because someone was always catering to him and doing it as a player. So I think learning these life skills while you're still in the game, and this can be difficult when you just, especially for student athletes, because you have class, you have this, your schedule is packed, right? But I think making an effort to just listen and even if it's just paying attention to things that interest you out of sports and just sort of making a note of that, because that might lead you to something that you can develop once your playing days are over. But if you can, look for internships. And then I heard on another podcast, which was really smart, Michael Strahan gave a tip, and he was like, look, while you're still playing, use that leverage, use those connections to start networking with people then and there, so that you're still an active player. You still have that leverage. You still have all those connections right there. Just start reaching out to people from that point and seeing what might be ahead of you. So it's a very quick synopsis there.
We might have to have a part 2 on that one. So the athlete transition. Yeah, for sure.
That's a huge topic. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Misty, thank you again for joining us today. But we always finish with the 4 Qs with 40 athletes. So these are, like I said, little bits of final insight from our guests. So the first one is this: in your opinion, what does it mean to win in the game of life?
To win in the game of life. This is going to be really cheesy, but I think it's being true to yourself and being happy. I think it's super, super difficult to live authentically as yourself and be okay with that. Like, this is who I am and I don't have to fit into whatever. I think that's so hard. So I think, but once you can do that, there's so much freedom there, and there's so much happiness, and there's so much peace, because the only person you can be is yourself. So you might as well as just be who you are. Yeah,
especially if you're trying to maybe live up to family expectations or comparison on social media. So yeah, authenticity, being true to who you are, can be some challenging times for sure with that. So that's a great answer. Number 2, if you could spend time with anyone you admire in sports, passed away, alive, fictional, non-fictional, who would it be and why would you pick them?
Holy smokes. Anyone in sports? So, geez. That's a really hard one. That's because so many people are coming to mind right now. So Shaq is really fun. I've had the opportunity of being around him once or twice. So he's a lot of fun to hang out with, actually. He's very entertaining. I haven't hung out with him like at a bar or something, but I was at a PR firm once that did some stuff for him. So I was at like a photo shoot, and he was like just really funny. So I can imagine what it's like to hang out with him. I would, God, there's so many people. Like, there's coaches that I would love to just like sit and have a conversation with, like Phil Jackson and all the stuff that he did with the Lakers and Mindfulness. And he brought in George Mumford, who I mentioned earlier, who's awesome. And I've had conversations with, God, there's so many names flooding my mind right now. That's a really tough question. How do you answer that?
Hey, did you see the video on Shaq? Shaq that he was doing like DJing at a big bill, and they threw a ball up, and the guy had like a little basketball goal. So it's all about him shooting like a free throw.
Yeah.
He switched, and everybody started going nuts. So yeah, big Shaq.
DJ Shaq. I forget what his DJ name is, but he's a trip. That guy is hilarious.
The third question we have is what is the best advice you ever received from a coach you played for or worked for?
The best advice from a coach that I've seen work, is that what you said?
That you've like played for before or worked for, been around?
Yeah. So one of the worst advices, and I'll tell you the best. So one of the worst things is I had a cheerleading coach who used to tell me bread makes you spread. So I was afraid to eat bread as a kid for a long time.
Whoa.
But we still laugh about that. My mom, like, bread makes you spread. So anyways, but I think one of the best things is my dad. So he was a coach, and I don't even think it's necessarily anything that he said in particular, but he always like preached being really tough and like reaching deep within yourself, but also he was so compassionate. So like there was this football player on his team growing up that he realized couldn't read. And he was like, well, that's not going to work. So he went to the freaking school and spoke with the principal and was like, what is happening here? That this kid is getting through all these grades and he still can't read and write. So I think just taking it to that level of, I would say like that, I wouldn't say it's like a phrase, but I would say just taking it to that level of being really compassionate. And then I'll share one more thing. Recently, my personal business coach told me, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And I love that one.
There we go. That what is the if you could have like one character trait or life skill, and you're hiring somebody to work for you, or you're coaching and brought somebody to play for you, and they can only have one character trait or life skill, what would it be and why?
I think it's adaptability. So when I hire somebody, I don't expect you to know everything, and I definitely don't expect you to do things perfectly or always be in a good mood. But what I do expect is that you're going to bring the best attitude and you're going to bring your best effort. So those are things that without exception, you have to bring those two things.
The two things you can always control, right, Jimmy? Attitude and effort.
Attitude and effort.
There you go. And if you can be adaptable with it, there you go.
Exactly.
You got a trifecta.
Right.
There we go.
Exactly. Those are the things that I will not hire anybody without those three things.
Yeah. Well, Misty, finally, where can people find you? Social media, what's your website? Where can people learn more about your book? Tell us where they can find you.
Oh, geez, I'm all over the place. So my website for the coaching is Purpose Soul, SOUL, athletics with an S.com. And then you can find me on social media on Instagram and Twitter at THE, and then my name, Misty Buck, all one word, or on LinkedIn. I'm there too.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, Misty, thank you for joining us today. Like I said, it was great to having you on. So much wisdom, insight, knowledge, and look forward to further conversation with you in the future.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the time. And again, really grateful for you allowing these conversations to happen and using your platform for people to continue to have them. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Misty, and keep up the great work. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day. All right. Well, Jimmy, managing emotions is essential to your success in all areas of life, but most of us aren't really taught how to do that. So that's why we've dedicated a whole week in the 40 Athletes program on managing emotions. Because the better you can manage your emotions, like Misty just talked about, the better you can manage your life. So, Jimmy, where can we find that 40 Athletes content?
Well, you go to 40athletes.com, and like I said, we have programs they can purchase there. But if they have a team or an organization, they can reach out to us, get a discovery call. We can kind of discuss with them how we can work with them to help their athletes win the game of life. And as you mentioned, the emotions, we've talked about it. Throughout my life growing up, I remember getting pulled out of the game, being a pitcher, and coming over and kicking the cooler or throwing my glove up against the dugout, right? Just stuff that I would do, and it just get so emotional and upset. And I reflect and look back, you're like, oh my gosh, this is why. And this is what I could have done if I'd had the tools like Misty's talking about that help you to be more this emotional, more intelligence, and more balance in what you do. So I think it's really important, whether it's us or whether it's your Misty or other people, like finding something you can work with your athletes to help them become better, to understand who they are, why they're doing what they're doing, and give them tools they can use to help them not only win in sports, but like we talked about, win in that game of life.
Absolutely, Jimmy. And, by the way, just a little preview next week, we got Rhea Lala coming on next week to talk about transformational relationships. So, March is International Women's Month.
Going to be excited about that one. There you go.
Hey, so is my wife, right? So that's how you get the women involved. Like, hey, by the way, I got this. You got hookah. Oh, okay, yeah. So, celebrating women this month. Try to get as many great women on as possible. We had one today. We'll have another one next week, and keep rolling through this snowy March, Jimmy. So,
well, it's going to be 70 next week. So April, here we come. Let's go.
Here we go. That's right.
All right, Jason.
All right.
Take care.